talking more about the response to the treaty principles bill. Of course, David Seymour has tabled this, and as a part of the coalition agreement, the government had said we'll support it to the first reading, but no further. It's likely to take 6 months in select committee, and David Seymour has commented that this is something that we need to discuss as a nation. He's also commented that church leaders, a group of church leaders, I think 44 altogether, who heads of denomination, the theologians and academics and people who are leaders within the Christian community, 44 people have signed an open letter on the Treaty Principles Bill saying why they think this shouldn't be a thing, and talking about some of the damage that it is doing to our society. Joining us on the program now is one of the signatories to that open letter, Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hutson from the Salvation Army. Ian, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Kia ora, good to be again here with you.
First up, now I kind of paraphrased the general tone of the open letter, but what sort of things does it contain, Ian?
Well, it's really speaking against the idea of having this kind of a bill go before the House without any kind of consultation with Māori, for example, and it's really concerned about what looks like when you sit behind some of the efforts that are, or the wording of the documents that we've seen to date. It seems to be looking to undermine the intent of the treaty. It's very much ahead of any kind of genuine discussion. And when you add that to all the other things that have been happening recently around legislation where Māori are concerned, it appears to be a definite attempt to try and undermine or even weaken whatever you might think that Te Tiriti is actually saying.
Yeah.
So that'd be the basic thing. But critically, no consultation before it gets to the select committee with Māori, who were the partners in signing the document.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Some critics have also said, though, that to have this open letter before we really know the substance of the Treaty Principles Bill in itself is also a little bit cart before the horse. For church leaders to say, hey, we're against the principles of the Treaty Principles Bill, but we're not entirely sure what those principles are yet. That seems a little bit of shaky ground, perhaps.
I think, there has been clear messaging going out about what it does contain. So some of it's based on that, but some of it's based on the fact that it going to select committee isn't a good place for it to be discussed. That's not very open in some respects. It's often select committee is a place where you go to produce a bill, and it's sort of fait accompli in many cases. And we've seen quite a few things go through Parliament this year where it's that's been the case.
We do know that this is the exception to that, though. This is a dead duck. This will never be law. It will never go to a referenda. There's also some comments that, gosh, isn't this a big waste of money to go to a select committee for 6 months for something which is never going to be enacted?
Yes, well, there is that about it. And one thing I do want to say really strongly is that I think we would support some way of discussing and trying to understand better what the principles of the treaty are, because they're not simple, and I think it would do good for New Zealanders to discuss it, but I just don't think that's the forum, and particularly when, in a way, the terms of reference or the framing of it is really geared towards to my way of thinking, or to our way of thinking, is to undermine what the treaty in the original place said. And why that's important for church leaders, I think, is because I'll say our forebears were there when they signed this thing. Māori wouldn't have signed this document, I believe, at least to some extent, if it hadn't been for the church leaders who talked with them, the Māori were no fools, of course,
Yeah.
but at the same time, um, they undertook in good faith signing this agreement, which to them was a covenant because of the spiritual aspect and the church's involvement, which is why it's so important, I think, for church leaders to say something about it, because we were there when it was signed.
Yeah.
We were part of the signing. It was viewed more than just a legal document. It was viewed as something that involved, it was sacred. God was involved. We need to be involved. And that's kind of why I felt it was so important that church leaders did stand up and say something in this instance.
The sting in the tail of church involvement with the original drafting and signing of the treaty, of course, is for Māori who feel that they got a raw deal or that they got deceived or tricked by the treaty. Of course, some go full circle and blame the church for some level of deception. But hey, that's another debate. That's a different conversation. In terms of you and your colleagues from the Salvation Army, though, how should we have this conversation? You say that the Treaty Principles Bill, not the way to discuss Te Tiriti and what it means for us as peoples of Aotearoa, but indicating there that we probably should be talking about it. What would be a better forum to do this, in your opinion, Ian?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably good ways of doing that would be to take it around, the country to talk about this sort of thing, but to do so in a way that involves Māori and maybe even, and when you're talking about how we're going to talk about it, that we do it together rather than one party going around sort of saying, well, we're going to talk about it. And by the way, these are what, because one aspect of what they have said about it is the idea that every citizen would be equal.
Yeah.
Right. That can be a little bit disingenuous in saying that, because what it can end up meaning is that none of the rights that treaty is embedded in the treaty for Māori will apply, because everyone should be equal. And so none of those things apply. So it becomes redundant. And so some of those kind of discussions need to be held, and to understand the history, to understand what was meant, what people were expecting when they signed it, and how we can do that practically in a different world. Yeah, that's what I think needs to happen. But it's not actually an easy conversation to have.
Certainly not. And even within Māoridom, you talked beforehand about how this is being pushed through into Parliament without Māori being able to have a consultation on this first. But I know other people would say, but hey, at least it's being discussed by elected officials. And to say that there is a Māori view on something is, again, overly simplistic. Māori have a range of different views and opinions on what this means and what their priorities are going forward. So it is a complicated issue. It would be a shame to just go, gosh, this is too upsetting for us as a nation, let's put it in the too hard basket. Maybe in another 200 years we'll get this sorted out.
Yeah, I do think we definitely need to discuss it. And part of that is for people to learn and understand the context that was signed.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a lot of just, learning and talking about that side of it, sharing, and then to try together to work that out. But why we're very much opposed to this is because, and I think there's some thought of having a referendum at the end. Referendums are always a bad way of deciding complex issues, because it's a yes and a no, and simplified, and also the parties haven't been allowed to work through the complex aspects of it together in a way that they can all understand. And I guess at the end of it all, probably won't agree with everything anyway.
Exactly. And we find that the case with referenda. I define referenda as it's an argument between the uneducated and the opinionated, and whoever's got the most numbers at the end of the day, that becomes law, which seems like a bit of a blunt instrument on something as fundamental to who we are as peoples of Aotearoa New Zealand. Ian, thank you for unpacking this. Thank you for the stance that you've taken on this particular issue. Thanks for the work that you do. salvationarmy.org.nz to find out more about this and other issues. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.